Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, May the 15th, 2025. Donald Trump has gone to the Middle East. He's probably back by now, but I'm not quite sure what his itinerary is. And he has met Mohammed bin Salman, who is Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And I get the impression that he's the one who wields the power. And so I thought in this video we would look at the horoscope of Mohammed bin Salman and Saudi Arabia in general. It's going to be somewhat disjointed. There are a lot of untimed charts. Well, certainly one untimed chart is that of Mohammed bin Salman. We don't know what time he was born. We do know what date he was born. He's a Virgo. So that's what I want to look at in this video. Mohammed bin Salman, look at a few charts, look at Saudi Arabia, look at a chart, at least a possible chart for the birth of the nation, and maybe make a few comments about what is actually happening in Saudi Arabia at the moment. But before we look at that, I want to consider the astrology and I Ching for today, which is Thursday, May the 15th, 2025. So here is the chart for today, May the 15th, set for noon in New York. If you do enjoy this video, by the way, feel free to press the like button, and if you're not subscribed, I would be very happy to have you as a subscriber. So here is the chart for today. The moon is in late Sagittarius, and it's getting ready for the changeover, the move into Capricorn. And this changeover takes place around 9 o'clock in the evening, London time. So if you're in the Americas, over the course of the afternoon, the moon will change sign, move from Capricorn move from Sagittarius into Capricorn. Of course, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon is going to be in Sagittarius all day. So it's bit of a mixed day, a bit of a split day. Those two signs, Sagittarius and Capricorn, are very different. Moon in Sagittarius, it's a fire sign. It's very active. It's full of energy, enjoys variety, whereas Capricorn is an earth sign ruled by Saturn, and it's slower and more considered, and can often look after its own interests. And there's nothing wrong with looking after one's own interests. Sometimes one has to, because no one else is going to look after you, are they? Well, it depends, doesn't it? But we do have to be the one person that understands our own interests, and that is the reminder from the moon in Capricorn. Now, before the moon moves into Capricorn, as it moves through the last degrees of Sagittarius, it does make a couple of aspects. It makes an opposition to Jupiter, and it makes a square to Saturn. And so you could say that the Jupiter-Saturn square is coming into focus. And of course, this Jupiter-Saturn square is going to happen, next month. It's just as Saturn is moving into Aries, Jupiter is moving into Cancer, and so we've got a square between Jupiter and Saturn to look forward to. And so the moon, as it makes the opposition to Jupiter, as it makes a square to Saturn, could bring all this together, and it may remind us of how difficult things are. I mean, confusing. Is there room for massive optimism? Should we really prepare for a better world? There's evidence that things are going to get better if we look around, but there's also evidence that things are going to get much worse. So we have to work out which is which, and we might find that we're being pulled in different directions. One moment being incredibly positive, moon opposition Jupiter, and then the next moment realizing that things are a little difficult, moon square Saturn. And Moon square Saturn is not an easy aspect. Saturn is now pretty close to Skeet, the fixed star associated with accidents and disasters. And so with the moon square Saturn, moon in Sagittarius square Saturn, moon in Sagittarius was about all those ideas we had. Everything looked so good. We were ready to go. Then it hit Saturn, and then, we've got to deal with reality. I mean, that might be one way in which moon square Saturn manifests. And then moon changes sign, moves into Capricorn, and straight away it makes a square to Neptune. So you could say that the moon is really aspecting these three outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, then Neptune. Moon square Neptune can be about uncertainty, and its moon is crossing the solstice point at 0 degrees Capricorn. So there may be moments of fear because the moon is on the Saturn-Neptune midpoint, and we're not sure. We're just not sure whether it's going to happen. We're not even sure whether we can take risks of any nature at all. I mean, that is the issue of Saturn and Neptune. Neptune wants to become part of something greater than itself, but Saturn is very concerned about its own boundaries. So there is a lot of uncertainty as that sign change takes place. And another aspect taking place is a semi-square between Mercury and Jupiter. Mercury is at 9-7 Taurus, Jupiter is at 24-25 Gemini, so Mercury and Jupiter are 45 degrees apart, and so it is exact today. And this Mercury semi-square Jupiter could have several manifestations. You could simply say Mercury is about talking, it's about communication. Jupiter is rather excessive. So some of us with Mercury square Jupiter might talk too much. Mercury can also be about thinking, and we might have ideas, big ideas, but we are challenged here because the semi-square is a challenging aspect to make sense of all these thoughts and these ideas, and we might find we're exaggerating or taking something too far. Though Mercury semi-square Jupiter, you could just see it as an aspect between Mercury and Jupiter. Forget the fact that it's a semi-square. It's just an aspect. It's a hard aspect, but it doesn't matter whether it's hard. It's just Jupiter making Mercury bigger. And it just may be, for some of us, just about pure optimism. We believe that things are going to work out. We believe that in spite of the difficulties that some of us have to face, it's going to be okay in the end. So we may be able to see that Mercury semi-square Jupiter in a way that really is entirely positive. And so that's the picture from New York. If we briefly switch to Sydney, Australia, as a representative of Australasia, noon in Sydney. So this would sort of apply if you're in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia. And you can see that at noon on May the 15th, Sydney time, the moon is in Sagittarius, 20 degrees Sagittarius. So that is a reminder that, all day long, the moon will be in Sagittarius. And probably the main aspect to consider if you are in Australasia would be moon opposition Jupiter. So moon opposition Jupiter is about exaggeration and taking things as far as one can, and it's moon in Sagittarius opposition Jupiter. So, we're trying to be positive, or at least you're trying to be positive if you are in Australasia, and there's a danger that you take things too far. If you're too positive, you go too far, and you need to step back and bring things under control, and maybe that will just happen later into Friday when the moon makes a square to Saturn. And then there is the heliocentric view. Here is the positions of the planets. with the Sun at the centre of the solar system. That Jupiter-Neptune square that I talked about yesterday, still very much in operation. Jupiter and Neptune are only 1 minute apart from being square each other. And Jupiter-Neptune squares, it is about perhaps thinking the best, thinking that things really can happen, and trying as hard as we can to be positive and optimistic. So it's kind of rather like what I was just talking about with that Moon-Jupiter opposition. So geocentrically, Moon opposition Jupiter, that does indicate a positive approach. And then we have Jupiter square Neptune as well. And there can be a hint of fantasy with Jupiter square Neptune. And also Jupiter square Neptune is triggered by Venus. So you can see heliocentrically, Venus is at 28-27 Sagittarius. So Venus is making an opposition to Jupiter. It's also making a square to Neptune. And so, in many respects, it's a real Jupiter-Neptune day. And, with Venus triggering it all. And, some of us might be so optimistic. It may just feel that things are really coming together. And look at what Trump is doing in the Middle East. He's easing the pressure on Syria. He's trying to be the peacemaker in the region. And one can be cynical, but it does seem that Trump and Mohammed bin Salman sort of get on well with each other. And so, whatever you think of Trump, maybe he's doing some good there, but we mustn't be too over-optimistic. We mustn't be over-optimistic about anything, because, things can go wrong, and people want the best. People think there can be peace. And so when they hear noises about peace, they think it's all going to be fine. And so there may be a deluded quality to today. And of course, haven't we got this meeting in Istanbul with Ukraine and Russia? I haven't quite been able to keep track of it because the situation changed. Keeps changing. But again, meetings, negotiations, so much hope there with Jupiter square Neptune. So much hope there with Jupiter square Neptune. But you have to remember, going back to what I was talking about with the Moon aspecting Jupiter and Saturn, is that the Moon is opposition Jupiter geocentrically, but it's also making a square to Saturn, and that is the last aspect the Moon makes before leaving Sagittarius. And so Moon square Saturn can squelch things, looking so good, and then it's just more of the same. So I'm sorry to be a little bit negative. There's always a positive way of looking at these things. Venus opposition Jupiter, Venus square Neptune, it might be a good aspect for thinking about things that are of a non-material nature. It's Jupiter Neptune. It's about faith in something that goes beyond ourselves and that links to our spirituality. So that may be a way in which this T square, and it is a T square because you've got Jupiter opposition Venus with Neptune on the T. The way this T square might be working. So that is the heliocentric view. Oh, I shouldn't forget that the Earth is making a trine to Saturn, and that Earth trine Saturn was exact yesterday, but it's still there today. And Earth trine Saturn is arguably quite a useful aspect. It allows us to get things together and to create some structure, and it may provide an antidote to some of the fantasy of Saturn, of the Jupiter-Neptune square. Jupiter-Neptune square, a lot of wishful thinking there, but because the Earth is trine Saturn, there is a little bit of realism there, and I think that it would be realism, but really could be very constructive. So that's the heliocentric view, and now I want to consider the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, May the 15th, 2025. Aries. Aries, you may feel that it is a time to transition from one stage to another. You have had lots of ideas, lots of insights. I mean, why not? And some of these insights have, perhaps been pretty amazing. And you are aware of, what is possible. And it's great to know what is possible. But at some stage, you have to actually take action. And you can't do everything at once. And you have to decide what is important. And so, as the day progresses, you do make this transition. You move to a stage of realism, and you start to appreciate what needs to be done. And there may be a moment of realization when you see things for how they are, and the moment you get that realization, you're able to move forward, and you can start to see what needs to be done in a very practical way. And so I'm hoping that by the end of the day, okay, it might be into tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand, that by the end of the day you're starting to really concentrate on what needs to be done. And it's quite possible that some of your ambitions kick into gear, and you become aware that you have to make priorities. You have to make your priorities clear, and you can't be all things to all people. You have to put your own interests first, without feeling any guilt or shame. It just has to be done. And with that approach, I think that you'll be able to make really, really good progress. And at the same time, Aries, you don't have to be completely honest. I mean, I'm not talking about telling lies. I'm talking about being open about what you want to do. There is a place for secrecy, for just keeping things to yourself until it's really necessary to talk about them. And so, Aries, it's a day when you may be able to put up some fog, put up a smoke screen, and go about your daily business, and you be very intentional in what you do, but no one's going to guess. I mean, they might have a sort of vague idea, but they're not really going to know. And because no one knows, you don't have to explain yourself, and you can just quietly get on with it. And using this approach, I think that you can move a long way towards achieving some of your aims. Now, in the process of all this, deep down, you are quite optimistic. You believe that if you're given the chance, then there isn't much you can't achieve. Now, part of you thinks that might be fantastic. I mean, fantastic in the sense of being about fantasy. It's all very nice to have big ideas, but is it actually going to happen? Well, Aries, if you are focused and you pare down some of your fantasies, you remove the things that can't be achieved, because this is a time for narrowing your focus. So you narrow your focus onto things that really are achievable. You can be ambitious. You just have to know what is the difference between ambition and overambition and just delusion. So you have to make the distinctions there. You can be slightly overambitious, but you just don't want to move into the territory of delusion. So Aries, do take it as far as you can, and also do make the most of other people's company. Venus is, now only 2 degrees from making a trine to Mars. I must emphasize that aspect. It is important. Okay, the moon was making a trine to Venus and a trine to Mars, yesterday on Wednesday. So that grand trine in fire signs isn't really there anymore, but still Venus is getting ever closer to Mars, and so I think that will allow you to get support if needed. And relationships I don't think should be your main priority today. There are more important things to be concentrating on, but you don't have to ignore it. And it's actually quite possible that the right relationship can actually help you achieve your goals, whatever those goals might be. Taurus, you're starting to be a little more down to earth. Recently you may have been worrying about things, going from going from one place to another place in your mind and in your heart, not quite sure where things were going, and just feeling this general feeling just concerned that you need to be serious. And if you take things lightly, well, then you might be getting yourself into trouble. But with the moon changing sign from Sagittarius into Capricorn, I think that things are getting easier. You're finding it possible to think about possibilities, not having to worry about what might go wrong. And so I would have said, Taurus, it's a day when things do get better, and you feel more relaxed, and you start to feel a lot more confident. And you shouldn't allow sort of any one-off worry or concern to get you down. Yeah, it's true that the moon does make a square to Saturn today, but don't take that moon Saturn square too seriously, and don't take things to heart. That's actually quite important. So it's possible that you get some negative feedback. You're told something you don't want to hear, and you might exaggerate it. You might put just too much effort into it and make something super significant, which really doesn't need to be significant. And so, don't allow that moon Saturn square to get you down, and it shouldn't get you down. And the moon Saturn square is a short-lived aspect, and then the moon moves into Capricorn. When the moon moves into Capricorn, you just feel better, and it just seems that there are more possibilities, and you're better able to deal with random events. First part of the day, it's possible that many Taurians were feeling a little bit vulnerable, and you might have felt that, or you might feel that if something unexpected happened, well, what would you do? It might potentially put you in an impossible position. But by the end of the day, you're feeling sufficiently confident to be able to countenance random events. And so a lot of it is how you perceive something. So something happens, you weren't expecting it, you could perceive it as a disaster, you could perceive it as an opportunity. And this is a day when you should be perceiving it as an opportunity. So don't panic if your plans get upset, or someone does something you completely hadn't expected, because it should be seen as something that just makes life more interesting, and that's what you want. And thinking about the heliocentric picture, Venus is your ruler. It's making a square to Neptune, and it's making an opposition to Jupiter, and that is quite an interesting aspect. So it talks about your doubts, Venus square Neptune. You might be concerned that you're walking on thin ice. You're somewhere, but you don't understand the rules, and it could all be very confusing. But Venus opposition Jupiter, is it represents part of you. You're really wanting to see things in the best possible light. And so, how far do you go? And do you have blind faith? And a bit of faith can actually go a long way. I mean, I know that faith gets a bad reputation. I mean, it can do. I mean, to think that the most amazing and far-fetched things are gonna happen when they can't possibly happen. But sometimes you need faith, and this is especially the case if you're in a difficult situation where you don't understand what's going on. Perhaps you should actually believe that something is looking after you. Maybe it's you looking after yourself, or some higher part of yourself looking after yourself. And so self-belief does matter, and it's going to be okay because the moon is in Capricorn, or the moon is moving into Capricorn. Now, I think for you, Taurus, moon in Capricorn is a good thing. It is something that is supporting, and it is something that understands your material needs, but also has a spiritual dimension. So if you have faith, you'll then start to believe that something is looking after you, and that might sound incredible. It might sound absurd, but maybe it's not absurd. And yes, Taurus, if you believe in yourself, you'll start to really get a feeling of total confidence, and that should be enough to see you through. And it really should be a day, Taurus, where things start to improve, and the end of the day should be better than the beginning of the day. Gemini, you are aware that nothing is quite as it seems. That is becoming clear. And it would be great to take everything at face value, and to be open and honest, and everyone says what they mean, and so that's great. But it's not necessarily going to be like that. And Gemini, that's something that you may have to accept. And so Gemini, you should always look at things closely, particularly if it matters, and certainly don't take things at face value. So if you're told something, it may be true, it may not be true, but you have to do your own research, as they say. And if it doesn't make sense, then something is probably wrong. And you possibly can't trust other people, and it's even possible that you get let down. You were hoping someone would behave in a particular way, or would deliver the goods, or would honour their promises, but somehow they don't. And I'm not saying that, by the way, is definitely going to happen, but it's important, Gemini, that you're just not too trusting. It's nice to be trusting, but I think that might be unwise. And so, if you do trust people, you might find that your attempts to do something, you're getting close, your things are coming together, and you just needed someone to come up with the goods right at the end, but they don't come up with the goods. So make sure that you've got alternative plans, and be prepared to do things yourself. I'm not saying you have to do things yourself, but if you are relying on another person to do something, don't. Make absolutely sure that there is an alternative. But with this approach, which is somewhat suspicious, you'll be giving yourself self-assurance and yes, protection as well. And don't feel also, Gemini, that you don't have any power or control. You do. And if you don't like the way things are going, you can change it, and you can maybe sort of make a fuss. If you want to make a fuss, I think that you'll be pretty good at it, and people will notice you. So you've got to really try, Gemini, to be in a position where you have power and control, and you shouldn't leave things to chance, because if you leave things to chance, well, what's going to happen? You're going to be disappointed. You may not be able to get anything done, and you're going to feel let down. But again, it's unnecessary. If you use your many and various resources, and you have a suspicious mind, you don't have to have a totally suspicious mind, but a little bit of suspicion can go a long way, then things should be okay. And also just be ready to take things seriously. Seriousness does matter. Now, probably the main aspect today is a semi-square between Mercury and Jupiter. Mercury is moving quickly. It wasn't so long ago that we had a sextile between Mercury and Jupiter. So we had Mercury in Aries sextile Jupiter in Gemini. That was a great aspect. Went on and on about it, how wonderful it was for Geminis. But now it's a semi-square, and a semi-square is not a sextile. A semi-square can be quite a difficult aspect, and it can be challenging. And you want to move forward with things. You'd love to, but you might have doubts. And the question is how you deal with those doubts. How do you deal with those doubts? Now, Mercury semi-square Jupiter might be about thinking too much. I mean, you certainly need to have some doubts. You need to be slightly suspicious. But if you have too many doubts, of course, that will grind you to a standstill. So Mercury semi-square Jupiter could be just a little bit of thinking is great, but too much thinking could actually be disastrous. And what you don't want is to get sort of tied up in sort of irrational fears. Geminis can do that. Once Gemini starts to worry about something, well, they just keep worrying about it, and the worries just won't go away. That is an issue with some Geminis. Well, certainly it's an issue with this Gemini, me. Maybe it's not an issue with you, but the Gemini mind just doesn't know when to stop, and once it starts to focus on something in an obsessive way, well, there's no ending of it. It just keeps going on. But that is only one possible manifestation of Mercury semi-square Jupiter. Mercury semi-square Jupiter can actually be quite lucky, because Jupiter's making an aspect to Mercury. Jupiter is in Gemini. Jupiter is larger than life, and it allows you to think about new possibilities, and it also allows you to imagine. So you can see what could happen if you had the best possible chance, and you need to give yourself that best possible chance. So I'm hoping that Mercury semi-square Jupiter has an optimistic edge to it, and that it allows you to think about possibilities. And don't forget, Gemini, that the Gemini season, it isn't too far away. I mean, it's just a week. No, not a week. Yeah, a week's. Yeah, just in a week's time, Sun will be in Gemini, and well, there will have to be further developments. I mean, the Sun will be in Gemini, then Jupiter will be moving into Gemini, and then everything's starting to move into Gemini. In fact, Uranus will move into Gemini soon enough. So, the Gemini season is starting, and it's about to start, and, you want to be able to make the most of it. And so, going back to that Mercury semi-square Jupiter, it is important to be positive and to, think about what you would really like to do. And, additionally, Jupiter's now moving through late Gemini. It is an opportunity, Jupiter moving through Gemini, and Jupiter's not going to be in Gemini for too much longer. It's soon enough is going to move sign, and it'll be in Cancer, and Jupiter won't be in Gemini for another 11 years. Now, a final manifestation of Mercury semi-square Jupiter may be about relationships, and relationships could take up some of your time. And a semi-square is a stressful aspect. We can't do anything about that. And with this aspect, you may become aware of certain incompatibilities between you and another person. And maybe you weren't aware of these incompatibilities before. Now, these incompatibilities may not be lifelong issues, but given external circumstances, they may be coming to the fore. So perhaps, if you are in a relationship, regardless of what nature that relationship is, circumstances change, and the way you and another person respond to these circumstances is not entirely concordant. And so there could be a difference of opinion, or there could be a different of approach or style. And you need to be aware of that, and don't necessarily think that you are in the right. It's possible, Gemini, that you are not sufficiently prepared to change your approach, and you should be thinking about alternatives. And if someone is doing something in a different way than you, in a way that you might disapprove of, or you think is not right, don't just automatically assume that they've got a problem. It may be that you can learn from the experience, and so you've got to give other people a chance. And if you give other people a chance, then I think that you could find that you really can be in a position to gain. So don't be too close-minded with that Mercury semi-square Jupiter. Cancer. Cancer, we have the moon moving into Capricorn, and inevitably that sign change is going to have an impact on you. I think that with the moon moving from Sagittarius into Capricorn, you may become aware that you can't necessarily make all the decisions on your own, that you may have to take into account alternative views, and you have to consider what other people are doing, what other people are suggesting. So that's one way in which it's going to change. And just before the moon moves into Capricorn, it makes an opposition to Jupiter, and it makes a square to Saturn. And those two aspects are actually quite contradictory. So at the beginning of the day, moon opposition Jupiter can actually be quite enthusiastic, and you can be aware of possibilities, and it may seem that things really are good if you just were able to just move fast enough. And so you might be getting ready for something that looks good, but then the moon makes a square to Saturn, and moon square Saturn can actually be quite a disappointing aspect. You thought things were coming together, and you thought you were doing a good job, and then Moon square Saturn represents something which appears to be blocking your progress. Now, how do you see Moon square Saturn? Now, Moon square Saturn might relate to an alternative view. You had been doing things with a certain assumption, and Moon square Saturn represents a new assumption. It's not assumption it's not an assumption you wanted to make, but you have to work with reality, and so you might have been slightly out of sync with the real world. And so that might be how Moon Saturn square works. And the key thing is not to panic. Moon square Saturn might just be about a little bit of fine-tuning. Though the Moon square Saturn might also be about relationships, be about how you respond and deal with another person. And it could feel that just someone is just holding you up, holding you back even, and they're not giving you the support you need. And that could be upsetting, certainly disappointing, but the important point is not to make it too significant. And I think you have to also realize that Moon square Saturn, it's a fast-moving aspect. The Moon will make the square to Saturn, then it will move into Capricorn, and Moon moving into Capricorn does create some changes, and you can start to see people in a new way. And when the moon moves into Capricorn, it actually makes a square to Neptune. So that's another aspect to consider. And that moon square Neptune, it continues on the theme of other people, and it may occur to you that you don't really fully understand what people stand for, what people are doing, what they're trying to achieve, and you'd like to understand, and you'd like to reach some conclusions, but it's not easy, and you might even be slightly annoyed that people aren't being very clear. But why should things be clear? We live in a complicated world, and some people just don't know, and you sometimes don't know. So Moon square Neptune can represent moments of confusion, when you'd like everything to be easy, but it's not easy, not least because you've got to deal with the human and social dimension. And that is a reminder that you can never really understand what is going on in another person's brain. You don't know how they're really perceiving things, how they're experiencing life. And you can guess, but there's a good chance that you'll be guessing wrong. So if things are unclear today, I would suggest that you just don't really worry about it. And certainly don't blame anyone, because no one fully knows what's going on. And so your confusion isn't unique. And if no one knows what's going on, well, that's a shared experience, isn't it? And at a later stage, the clouds will clear. But right now, we have got we've got some low lying cloud, could be fog, and that's the way it is. And that means you just have to adjust your behavior accordingly. Leo, you are in a mood where you are fairly sociable. I think that you have the ability to relate very well to other people. Like yesterday, I think you had this yesterday, but today as well. You know what people want. You know how to relate, and if you just be yourself, then you're going to be popular. And it's not that anything amazing is going to happen, but it will just feel that, Leo, you are supportive and people will gravitate towards you. Though you also understand that nothing is entirely easy, but some things have to be worked for. So maybe you felt yesterday that things were fairly straightforward, that you could just be yourself and be fine. But now you realize that nothing can be entirely taken for granted. And if you want to be able to see things through, then that does mean that you're going to have to put in the effort. So, Leo, it's important that you are able to make that effort, and it might be a little bit of a pain, and there might be sort of a moment actually of real irritation. You thought you were on the right track, you thought things were coming together, you thought you understood everything, and then suddenly you realize, hold on, this isn't so easy. And what you thought was simple turns out to be not complicated, but just hard work. And so as the day progresses, it just does become, in a way, more of a chore. But I wouldn't allow that to get you down. It's just the way it is, and if you just go with it, it should be fine. And if you put in the work, you will definitely be okay. You just have to be ready to change gear, and you have to know when to change gear. And I think it will be clear. Suddenly, something will become more difficult than it had been over the last day or two. Suddenly, there'll be resistance. Suddenly, you'll have some doubts. And just that is the moment when you have to up the pace, when you have to start taking responsibility for everything. And yeah, it's not something you want to do, and it might be an irritation. And to begin with, you may not know what you're doing, but if you keep going, it will be fine, and you'll be able to sort of tie up some loose ends, and what seemed unattainable, can actually be reachable. But again, you will have to make the effort, and effort perhaps is especially important. Given that the sun is moving through the last degrees of Taurus now. Very soon, 5 days' time, beginning of next week, the sun will be in Gemini. Now, there are many advantages of the sun moving into Gemini, but while the sun is moving moving through Taurus, you have things you need to do, perhaps relating to your aims and your targets, and so time may be running out a little bit. So, with the moon moving into Capricorn, should be moving into Capricorn today, well, it might be tomorrow if you're in Australasia, but with the moon moving into Capricorn, this is a chance to really get things together, and that may say something about what you're going to be doing, tomorrow, Friday, into the weekend, just making sure that everything is on track. And yeah, if you can do that, you won't be sorry. Virgo, we have the moon moving out of Sagittarius and into Capricorn. And this sign change probably works in your favor. I think with the moon in Sagittarius, it hasn't always been easy. And you might have felt that you had to do things, on your own, in your own way. And yeah, there might have been pressure from the outside to do things that you maybe didn't want to do, and you found that pressure. Yeah, you found that pressure irritating, but you wanted to hold firm, and you were trying to be stubborn, and you really did think that you understood the rules, you understood the way things were going, and other people were just a little bit of a pain. But now that the moon is moving out of Sagittarius into Capricorn, things do feel as if they're getting better, and there might actually just be one last confrontation, or perhaps one last worry, which we could symbolize as being the square between the moon and Saturn. So the moon, right at the end of Sagittarius, makes a square to Saturn in Pisces. So that moon square Saturn could well be about someone appearing to block your progress. They're getting in your way. They're preventing you from, doing the things you want to do, and it's annoying. But it's just very important not to overreact. That moon square Saturn does not last very long, and then the moon moves into Capricorn, and straight away things just feel so much easier. And of course, when the moon moves into Capricorn, it starts making a trine to Mercury. Now, that trine to Mercury is not going to happen until tomorrow, but you can feel its slow beginnings, and so you're going to find that things are going to flow more, because the moon in the end will make a trine. Moon in Capricorn will in the end make a trine to the Sun. That isn't for a bit of time. That probably isn't until Saturday, the moon trine Sun. But it really does help move things along. So if you're feeling a little bit stuck, or you have felt stuck sort of yesterday and the beginning of today, don't worry, because it really does seem that things are moving. And if you hit an obstacle and it feels like an insurmountable obstacle, then don't worry about it. There is a way through. You could use your intelligence. You could use your subtlety. You could, in certain situations, just use psychological brute force. I mean, not physical brute force, but psychologically using everything you've got, all the resources available to you, to smash the obstacle out of the way. Yeah, you can do it. So Virgo, things really do look good for you, provided you're able to take advantage of everything that is available, not just with the external world. In fact, the external world could seem troublesome, left to its own devices. But if you are able to, think about yourself and what you've got and what you can bring to bear, then you'll realize that there are few things that can stop you. Libra, you don't have to say yes to anything. You might feel an obligation to say yes, because that's what's expected of you, and that can be a Libran issue. You don't want to upset anyone. You say yes, and the trouble is about saying yes to everyone is that you end up breaking your promises. And that can be a Libran issue. Librans try to be nice, and the reality may be different. So whenever you're asked to do something, or you're asked to give your support or to volunteer your time, don't rush into saying the first thing that comes to mind, which is usually going to be yes. You can wait, or you could actually say no. It's okay to say no. It might actually be quite a good day for saying no. And one reason it's a good day for saying no is because the moon is making a square to Saturn. It's also making an opposition to Jupiter, and we could actually see the moon opposition Jupiter moving to a square of Saturn as being a progression. So moon opposition Jupiter is enthusiasm, wanting to say yes, and then moon square Saturn is saying, well, having second thoughts and saying, well, maybe no, but maybe not, maybe that's not something you want to do. So don't agree to things. You don't have to agree to things, although it seems the easy option, but you can withhold your decision, or you can just say no. I mean, it's easiest to say no. And with moon square Saturn, it almost feels like you're expected to say no. So if you say no to someone, whatever the request is, even if it seems trivial, just a few minutes of your time, it will actually be the natural thing to say. And so once you've set yourself up, once you've made sure that everything is clear for yourself, so you're not tied up in obligation, then things become easy. And the moon moves from Sagittarius into Capricorn, and in Capricorn you can center yourself, and you can start to understand what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And additionally, don't rely too much on other people, and don't listen necessarily to what they say. The moon, when it moves into Capricorn, well, having made that square to Saturn, it then goes on to make a square to Neptune. And this is a time when other people may not be trustworthy. They may let you down. And just as I warned you about making promises which you might not be able to keep, I'm also suggesting that you don't listen too much to other people's promises. People can say anything, as you know, and it doesn't necessarily mean a thing. And promises are negotiable, and they can be broken if circumstances demand it, and circumstances are changing. So promises are going to be, I think, pretty meaningless. So if you understand that situation and you are actually pretty self-reliant, then I think that things are going to be great. It's just that if you get obsessed about obligation, you could tie yourself up in knots, and actually it could end up being a miserable day. But that would be, I think, pretty unnecessary. Now, I don't want to suggest that from a social perspective it is a desert or should be a desert. Venus is still making a trine to Mars. Mars may represent another person, someone who you find it very easy to get on with. And while Venus is making that trine to Mars over the next 10 days, do try to look at the people around you and look at particular people who could really, really help you and be of benefit. And I am going to still keep emphasizing that Venus, that aspect between Venus and Mars, because it's not just a day-by-day thing. These daily forecasts. Some things just persist day after day after day, and one thing that is persisting is that square between. Is that trine between Venus and Mars. And one other thing, from a heliocentric view, Libra, Venus is actually doing quite a lot. Venus is opposition Jupiter. Remember, this is heliocentrically, not geocentrically. But Venus is opposition Jupiter, and it is square Neptune. And so, you could say that Venus is heliocentrically aspecting the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint. And with Venus aspecting a Jupiter-Neptune midpoint, I think it's would be making a sesquiquadrate to a Jupiter-Neptune midpoint heliocentrically. I mean, I know that sounds completely obscure, but with that aspect, it could be about faith and what is the role of faith. And faith comes up not just for you, but for some of the other of the 12 signs. And getting faith right is potentially going to be important. Now, faith can be a real trap. You think of blind faith, believing in something that is not worth believing in. On the other hand, faith used in the right way can be something that is really supporting, can take you from one place to another. It is knowing that things are going to be okay, but things are going to be looked after. And faith is not appropriate in all directions, in all areas. And faith is about following the path that you feel has been created for you. And if you follow that path and you believe you're doing the right thing, and yeah, you might hit a problem, you might hit an obstacle, but the faith will take you through. So there is a place for faith today, and it may be that one of the keys to having a great day is having appropriate faith. And if you believe that things are possible, provided they are in accordance with your destiny, then I don't think that you'll be disappointed. Scorpio, the moon is changing sign. It's changing sign from Sagittarius into Capricorn. I don't think that the moon in Sagittarius felt especially comfortable. Sagittarius and Scorpio are two very different signs. Scorpio, a negative sign, ruled by Mars. Sagittarius, positive, ruled by Jupiter. And the thing about the moon in Sagittarius, especially late Sagittarius, is the moon makes an opposition to Jupiter and a square to Saturn, and those two aspects are not necessarily very helpful. The moon opposition Jupiter might have sort of put you into overdrive, thinking about what needs to be done, what needs to be worried about. And that moon opposition Jupiter could have driven you into a little bit of a frenzy, too much thinking, and especially about things that you didn't really want to be thinking about. For example, money, or who has what, who owes what, who owes how much money to someone else, have you got enough money, having to deal with financial demands. And then the moon makes a square to Saturn, moon in very late Sagittarius makes a square to Saturn, and that could again be more concerns about money, or wondering how much something costs. Even the whole process of spending money could really hurt, and having to worry about whether you're being overcharged. I mean, these are trivial matters, and Scorpio knows that there are more important things going on than that. And then the moon moving into Capricorn, whenever it is, it might be today, it might be tomorrow, I think is probably for you a favourable event. You can move beyond all the things that were holding you up, providing unnecessary worries, and you can start to think about what is really important, and you may be able to start to assemble the facts. The facts had been denied to you, or the facts had been overly confusing, but now with the moon moving into Capricorn, you can be more down to earth. Okay, the moon does make a square to Neptune Moon does make a square to Neptune. I don't think that Moon square Neptune is going to be too much of a problem, but facts matter, and Moon square Neptune could be about the first facts that you come across are maybe not right. So if there's a new area of inquiry, something you're trying to get information about, and you're trying to get the picture, the first impressions are probably not the right impressions. The first impressions, they seem to make sense, but really they don't make sense at all, and they're likely to be false impressions. So it's very important today and into tomorrow that you don't rush to judgment. And the first thing you're told about something is very likely to be incorrect. So it's just important that you get different views. If that is especially going to be the case if you're trying to understand something important. Perhaps you've got a plan and you're trying to work out whether it's the right thing to do, and you're assembling information, and so it would be easy to just give up because you're given negative feedback. Or it would be easy to commit yourself to something maybe quite big on the basis of what you're told, and just trusting someone. So don't trust anyone, especially when it comes to facts. But it's a day when we need to be very careful about trust, and it's not just a Scorpio thing. I think a lot of people are making things up, and a lot of people, they don't know, but they still feel they have to say something. So they say something, and there's a very good chance that it is completely wrong. So it's important that you realize that there's a lot of confusion around today, and it's not just a Scorpio thing. And still, when the moon moves into Capricorn, it might make a square to Neptune, but it just still feels easier. You feel that you're doing something more practical, and that you're slowly moving towards an answer. And it should be slowly. If you try to quickly find an answer, you try to find instant solutions, then it's probably not going to work out. So it's going to be important that you take your time. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, your ability to communicate is probably going to be quite good, and you're going to be able to make people feel good about themselves. Now, you may not have much of a basis for doing that, and being a Scorpio, you like to be sincere and down to earth, and you don't like to exaggerate. But you might find that you do exaggerate a little, and just by saying something nice, even if you don't necessarily believe it, you can make people feel good about themselves, and that will feed into the fact that Venus is making a trine to Mars, and Venus trine Mars represents a relationship that is trying to come together, and over the next week, 10 days, Venus moves towards this trine of Mars, and it can be a relationship about anything. So do look out for other people, and see what other people can do for you, and what you can do for them, and just don't forget that Venus trine Mars. And the reason I say that Venus trine Mars is good for you, and I also, reason I keep going on about it is because it is important to see beyond the daily trivia, and the daily trivia can be represented by people appearing who are not really worthy of too much of your time, and you have to make distinctions. You have to work out, who are your friends and who should you be spending time with, And I do think it's quite possible that Venus trine Mars may be about one person, and one person who could be having an increasingly significant role in your life. And so that's something to be looking forward to over the next couple of weeks. But I don't want to over dramatize it, of course. People can have different roles. It's not necessarily a permanent role. It's not necessarily an incredibly important role, but it's still a role that can be beneficial. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, you may feel the influence of two aspects today. Might be more at the beginning of the day, but we've got the moon in Sagittarius making an opposition to Jupiter, and then the moon in Sagittarius, it makes a square to Saturn. And so, these two aspects could be rather confusing, especially at the beginning of the day, especially if you are in Australia or New Zealand. So it may depend where you are. If you're in the Americas, then you're very much the beginning of the day. If you're in Australia and New Zealand, then probably all day. So you do have to consider your time zone. But moon opposition Jupiter is right across the main axis of your chart. You've got moon in Sagittarius, opposition Jupiter in Gemini, and this may be about relationships or a particular relationship, and there may be something just a little bit excessive about it. But you just might have connections with another person or interactions with another person that may be slightly exaggerated, and it may feel rather fortunate, as if it's kind of going your way. But Jupiter, your ruler, is in Gemini, and so because it's in Gemini, because Jupiter's in your opposite sign, you may not feel entirely in control. And then the moon, having made that opposition to Jupiter, it makes a square to Saturn, and so that might be about expectations, high expectations, followed by some kind of disappointment. So that's kind of unfortunate that the moon makes an opposition to Jupiter and then makes a square to Saturn. So Jupiter may represent the possibility, and Saturn, could represent the disappointment. And on the way, the moon is sort of on the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint. So the moon is sesquiquadrate 135 degrees from the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint. And this may not just be about people, it may actually be about society. And there may be moments where you look around you and you feel what's going on, and what you see in the news is reflected in your environment. It's real. It's not just being made up. So the big concerns in the world, the headlines about whatever it is that society and the world and the planet is experiencing, you see it in your daily life, and that could bring you down to earth in quite a major way, and may really be leading up to that moon making a square to Saturn, and that might make you feel ever so slightly insecure. But if you do feel ever so slightly insecure and worried about the future, well, it's just moon square Saturn, and the moon does change sign. And so when the moon changes sign, moves into Capricorn, things will possibly be easier, but you're still thinking about what you have got and what you don't have. And so moon moving into Capricorn, Capricorn is a very materialistic sign, and so there may be a material dimension creeping in, as the day progresses, as you move into tomorrow, and despite your high hopes and your enthusiasm, you still realize that bills need to be paid. You need to make sure the books balance, and the moon, when it moves into Capricorn, it does make a square to Neptune, and that square to Neptune is quite important because Neptune is very close to the Aries point, and the moon will be on the solstice point, and so you might feel a bit of uncertainty about money. Where is it all going? Do you actually know what you're spending? And that worry is not going to last for too long, but it's just maybe a little concern, a bit of a concern, which sort of upsets your general feeling of happiness. And another aspect we've got today, you could say it's the big aspect of the day, is a semi-square between Mercury and Jupiter. And Mercury and Jupiter, this Mercury-Jupiter semi-square, there are different ways of looking at it. One way of looking at the Mercury-Jupiter semi-square is to say that it's about other people, and it's about how you relate to people, because Mercury is ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign. And so with Mercury semi-square Jupiter, you could become aware of certain incompatibilities between yourself and another person. You could, or at least you're aware of how different you and another person are. And the question is, what do you do with that realization? Just because you realize that you and someone else are different doesn't mean to say that you can't get on with each other. I mean, it might be a question of, what is it, vive la différence, or whatever. It's good to have a bit of difference, but sometimes, at least in the short term, those differences can be a problem, and they maybe have to be negotiated. Though a different way of looking at Mercury semi-square Jupiter is that your approach may be a little hard to handle sometimes. You might be ever so slightly larger than life. It's not that you actually feel larger than life, but from another person's perspective, you seem to be a little over the top. So it could be about another person trying to get things together, trying to understand what's going on, and then Sagittarius comes along and just causes a lot of confusion. Now, you don't feel that you're causing a lot of confusion. You just feel you're being yourself. But there's something about the Sagittarian personality that may be difficult for some people to handle. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with the way you're expressing yourself. The problem might be with the other person, and you're perhaps forcing someone to see things in a new and maybe even exciting way. Capricorn, things are starting to make sense. Recently, it may not have been entirely easy to, understand what was happening. You looked at the world, and you looked at things going on. People were doing all sorts of stuff that you didn't necessarily have much sympathy with, and you were waiting for things to return to normal. And now this is what you might feel, a certain sense of normality. And the normality may actually start with a square between the moon and moon and Saturn. So moon in Sagittarius, just before it moves into Capricorn, makes a square to Saturn. And moon square Saturn aspects can be difficult. But I think for you, this moon square Saturn may be something you quite appreciate. You have a chance to assert your control. Maybe you can assert your control over another person. They might not like it, but you are the one who is calling the shots, or you're increasingly calling the shots. And it's about that transition from a state of confusion, your confusion, to a state of being aware and being the one who is in control. So that is something to look forward to. And so if you start the day feeling that nothing makes sense, don't worry about it. Things are going to clarify very quickly. And also you will have no problems establishing yourself and establishing your authority. You've always known that you're able to establish your authority and be a controlling influence. And over the last few days, you just felt that you didn't have the chance, or maybe you didn't feel that other people were taking you sufficiently seriously. But no, you are a serious person. That is clear, and you can't be avoided. And so, Capricorn, make the most of it. If there's anything you don't like, you can change it. And if you want to implement something, then with the moon moving into Capricorn, okay, it might not move into Capricorn until tomorrow, but as you move into Friday, it's a great time for getting people to really appreciate you, and you might be the one who actually has all the answers. So that is a good position to be in. So don't be negative, and just look at all the areas in your life where you're able to have an influence. Now, in terms of relationships, I talked about that moon square Saturn, and that moon square Saturn could be quite important today, even after the moon moves into Capricorn. And relationships are only going to work if they take place on your terms. If you're trying to make another person happy, then that's not the right relationship to be in. That's not, or that's not how you should see relationships. It's all about you deciding what you want and other people fitting in with it. And that's the way it should be. And because the moon makes a square to Saturn, and then moon moves into Capricorn. So you could say that is about an initial conflict or an initial misunderstanding, and the other person has a choice. They can go away, or they can do things your way. And so if someone starts to behave, starts to cooperate, having perhaps been previously uncooperative, that is a good sign that things are working. Aquarius, you're able to stop things. So today, if you don't like the way things are happening, you don't like the way people are behaving, then you can just end it. It's going to be quite easy. Now, there are a number of ways of ending something. You can end something just by moving from one place to another. You can just leave. You don't like the way things are going, or you're bored of it, you're feeling dissatisfied, you just stop, you go somewhere else, and that's it. You can also be more active. If you don't like what people are doing, you can put your foot down. You can say you don't appreciate it anymore. Okay, you can be more diplomatic about that if you want, but whatever it is, you don't have to put up with anything, and that should be very reassuring, and it may actually allow you to be more tolerant, strange as that might sound, because if you know that you can always stop something, then you can just continue with it. you can put up with it because you do know that you're ultimately in control. So that should make life easier for you. So don't tolerate anything which is unacceptable. When it reaches that point where you can't stand it any longer, then just move on, finish it, and do what you feel is necessary, right now, whatever that might be. And part of it might be that you're feeling that other people are maybe becoming too much of a good thing. They've done their bit. You've watched them. You experience social interaction, and there comes a point where you feel you just want to move on, and that's great, and it does give you real control, and you are someone who right now can absolutely make things happen at whatever level. You can make things happen just through sheer sort of willpower, or through your own actions by just, you could be quite passive about it. You could, as I've just said, you could just leave, or you can be more definite. You can tell people what you want, and I think that in most cases people are going to listen to you, because there's going to be something about you, Aquarius, that is really very authoritative, and you are unlikely to have to repeat yourself. So I think that looks pretty good, though you've got to have some consideration for other people. It's tempting to be selfish, and certainly you can be selfish if you want to be selfish, but you would probably be advised to consider what people want, particularly if those people are important to you. You might be feeling increasingly antisocial as the day progresses, but other people may have a different view. Particularly if you're in some kind of relationship with them, they may actually be a lot more sociable than you. So, don't necessarily impose your values and opinions on other people if it's not necessary, because there's no point in causing offence if you don't have to. But if you really want to make the most of today, it would probably be best if you're not surrounded by loads of people. If you're on your own, if you're doing things that you enjoy, if you're perhaps able to relax a little, that would be the best way of utilizing today's energies. Pisces, the moon is changing sign from Sagittarius to Capricorn, and the last aspect the moon makes before leaving Sagittarius is a square to Saturn, and I think that this square to Saturn could actually be quite useful. Indeed, it might even be important. And you've had Saturn moving through your sign since the beginning of 2023, and Saturn is getting ready to enter Aries. It's really close. I think Saturn enters Aries on the 25th. So what's that? You only got another 10 days. The next time the moon makes a square to Saturn, actually Saturn will be in Aries. So Saturn, right at the end of Pisces, receives this square from the moon, and I regard this square as being a serious aspect. It's not something to be trivialized, but it's also not something to be feared. I think that this moon square Saturn, reminds you of, who you are and, what you've been trying to achieve. certainly, over the last couple of years. And you might be aware of what you haven't achieved. You may have achieved a certain percentage of your targets, but there's still something missing. And with Moon square Saturn, it might feel that there's a little bit of pressure. And I think that's a good thing. You're aware of what you've done, but you're also aware of what you're missing, and so if you feel that something has to be done as a result of this Moon square Saturn, then go ahead and do it. Now, quite when this Moon square Saturn happens, rather depends on your time zone. It might be quite early in the day if you're in California, for example, but it would be tomorrow if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But it is a dynamic aspect, and so I would suggest that you take advantage of it. And then the moon moves sign. It moves from Sagittarius into Capricorn, and straight away there is a change. It may mean that there is not quite so much focus on your ambitions and what you want to achieve right now, and you may be wanting to think more about your social life and the people around you, and also looking at your general ideas about the future and your hopes for the future and what you think might be possible, and also what might be holding you back. So we get two squares. We have the moon making a square to Saturn in Sagittarius, and then when the moon moves into Capricorn, it makes a square to Neptune. And the moon square Neptune is a rather different energy. It at first might be a little bit unsettling. You feel that you have to change your focus, be more diffuse, not concentrate just on sheer ambition, but on something more general. But thinking about something general can be a little difficult. It can be confusing, and you might be considering your resources. Do you have what it takes to make the kind of transition you are looking for? And when I say have what it takes, I'm thinking perhaps about money and earning power. That may be one dimension to it. And when you think about money with Moon square Neptune, as you might be thinking about money, your first instinct might be to panic or to just feel that you don't know what you're doing. But it is Moon square Neptune, and Moon square Neptune is a short-lived aspect. It doesn't last long. It really, in its immediate phase, just lasts a few hours. But maybe it's also a reminder that Neptune is in Aries, and Neptune in Aries, it's going to stay in Aries, okay, on and off. Okay, Neptune will briefly go back into Pisces at the end of the year, but Neptune's going to stay in Aries for some time. And so with Moon square Neptune, you are reminded of what it means for Neptune to be in Aries. And I think that in the Pisces chart, Neptune in Aries can be about your attitude to money. And it may be a time where you find it difficult to know what the right attitude is. And Neptune in Aries for you, Pisces, is not just about being careless with money. It can also be about being unsure about money. And actually, if you're unsure about money, one response might be actually not to spend money. Because if you don't know what you can afford, if you don't know how to utilize your financial resources, you might regard the safest thing to do is to just spend nothing and actually be frugal. So that might sound a bit strange, but with Neptune and Aries, for some Pisceans, it might make you more frugal. And that could be a good thing, but you can be too frugal. So there are different ways in which Neptune and Aries is working out. But maybe when the moon makes a square to Neptune, you should think about your responses, and your responses may be telling you about what it means for you for Neptune to be in Aries. But one response you can have to all this, is to think about your resources and also to think about what you can do, because at the moment, Pisces, it's quite clear that there are a couple of things that you really do very well, and you can put a great deal of energy into them, and you'll end up doing a good job. And so think about what you're best at, not just what you're good at, but what you're best at, and that skill, probably sort of learnt over time, can really put you in good stead. So it's important that you are able to concentrate on what makes you special and what makes you super talented. Now, another astrological event that we possibly need to consider is a semi-square between Mercury and Jupiter. Jupiter, remember, is your ruler. And with this Mercury semi-square Jupiter, it could represent an irritation. That's one way of looking at it. And the irritation could come from another person. So if we're talking about relationships, then they may not be entirely easy because someone else may appear to be annoying. Their approach may not quite gel with your approach, and there is a possibility of a conflict with this semi-square. Now, it's not an opposition. It's not Mercury opposition Jupiter or Mercury square Jupiter. It's maybe a little more subtle than that, though. Mercury. There is an argument that Mercury semi-square Jupiter is going to be exactly like Mercury square Jupiter or Mercury opposition Jupiter or even Mercury conjunct Jupiter, and so you become very aware maybe of the differences between you and another person. But there is an aspect. It's not like you and another person have nothing to do with each other. A relationship has a basis, and this is perhaps what this Mercury semi-square Jupiter is about. And so maybe you can get a perspective on how you and another person are different. It could be about a partnership you're currently involved with, or a partnership which is developing. And this Mercury semi-square Jupiter perhaps needs to be seen in the context of a recent sextile between Mercury and Jupiter, because not so long ago there was a sextile between Mercury and Jupiter, and when there was a sextile between Mercury and Jupiter, I was saying how great it was for Pisces and their relationship. But now the sextile has developed. It's developed into a semi-square. And so maybe you should see this as being about how a relationship has developed. There seemed to be a connection between you and someone else, but now it's become more complicated and it needs a little bit more effort. And effort can be a word that one uses with semi-squares. It's not easy, but if you make the effort, you and someone else can find a way of living together, perhaps, or at least functioning together and doing something useful. But it just needs a little bit of work, this Mercury semi-square Jupiter. So although it sounds bad, I think that if you take a constructive approach, I think it actually can end up being quite a fortunate aspect. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and it's now time to look at the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 41, which is decrease. So it doesn't sound too good, does it? Decrease, at least on the surface. So what do we mean by decrease? Well, the I Ching doesn't actually see any problem with decrease. Decrease is seen as something completely natural, completely organic, and the I Ching is always making this play between increase and decrease. The I Ching almost regards increase and decrease as being the same thing. Maybe I've misunderstood the I Ching, but if you want to increase something, say you've got something you want to build up, then you have to take something away from another area. And there may even be a feeling of having to give something up or to sacrifice. You can't have everything at once. And if you want something new in your life, something has to be given up. And so with decrease, it is about refining who we are. And there are things in our life now that are surplus to requirement. We might be hanging on to them for no particular reason, or all of us have a hoarding instinct, don't they? So hoarding, which sign is the greatest hoarders? Someone said that Cancerians are hoarders. If you're a Cancerian, I don't mean to offend you. Is that true? I don't know, perhaps. But this part of the video is not really about astrology. And so if you do have a hoarding instinct, whatever your sign, and you're holding on to things, then just maybe let go, give them away, or sell them, or whatever feels best, because you're by clearing things out, you do have a greater sense of who you are and what you actually can do. And we have the fifth line moving here. Fifth line in the I Ching tends to be the most fortunate line in a hexagram. And indeed, with the fifth line moving, this is incredibly lucky. Strangely, of all the lines in the book, the fifth line of 41 is actually one of the most fortunate lines in the book. And there are a lot of lines in the book. And it's saying that you are going to be fortunate. You are marked out for good fortune. The universe likes what you're doing. And so how does this relate to decrease? So it seems that just by a small reduction of something, just by giving something up that is just cluttering your life, that is not useful, then everything changes. You attract energy. It's like you've created a vacuum within yourself, and the energy and good fortune of the universe comes rushing in. So actually things look really good, and it doesn't take much to get this thing that you need. And it's, if you're offered something, you should take it. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. I was thinking, of course, if you're Donald Trump and you're listening to this, you would really go for that, because if someone offers you an aeroplane that's worth $400 million, don't say no. So if you happen to be Donald Trump and you're listening to this, take the plane. You're being offered. It's been given to you, and I think that's what Trump has said. You take the plane. Thank you very much. It would be rude anyway not to accept the plane. But sorry, I'm trivializing this thing. If you are made an offer, someone offers you something, don't refuse it. Take the gifts that the universe is giving you, and enjoy it, and enjoy your good fortune. Now, there is a moving line here, and so because it's a moving line, that does mean that we move to a different hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 61, which is the inner truth. And with this inner truth, we can almost see the vacuum in this hexagram, because this hexagram, in its heart, you can see there's an empty space. And so once we've created this empty space, we just put ourselves in complete balance. And we're not just lucky because we have got this good fortune of having cleared that space. And good luck is coming our way. The universe is smiling on us. And within a truth, we are able to be believed. People actually listen to what we're saying. This can be difficult, but the inner truth, the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching, is saying, well, even pigs and fishes understand what we're saying, because pigs and fishes are supposedly animals that are quite stubborn and they're difficult to get through to them. Yeah, but even pigs and fishes. So armed with our own inner truth and having cleared out the garbage, because in the previous hexagram, decrease, it's not just about giving away material goods, it's about perhaps giving away ideas, things we've taken very seriously have become part of our life, and we suddenly realize, well, we don't actually need them anymore. And we have the space, and that gives us integrity, and we actually start to understand the truth, and we're feeling fortunate, and the universe is not just smiling upon us, but it's making us attractive. It's attractive to others, and if we're struggling for the truth, we reach a stage where we actually understand it, and we just feel very whole. And that's it. That's I Ching. And now I want to look at Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman. And this last part of the video is probably going to be somewhat confusing. Now, Mohammed bin Salman, he is an important man. He's the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and he is someone who has a lot of power. He's been Crown Prince since, I think, 2017. And he has had a big impact on Saudi Arabia. It's a country which is not exactly a democracy. Yet he's trying to change things. He's trying to deal with its economy. I mean, he doesn't like the fact that Saudi Arabia is dependent on oil, and he wants to look at other things, for example, tourism and industry. And oil, I think now represents 60% of Saudi Arabia's revenue. So it's not the whole thing, but it's still pretty important. And it's of course not great when the oil price is $61 a barrel. I think The Economist had an article on Saudi Arabia, and they said that really Saudi Arabia needs oil to be over $90 a barrel. So oil is a bit of an issue. So Mohammed bin Salman has taken on a lot, and I think we should start off by looking at his horoscope. And of course, he is someone who gets on fairly well with the American president, much better than he did with Joe Biden. I mean, he couldn't stand Joe Biden. Him and Joe Biden just didn't get on. Now, if you are America, you need to have good relations with Saudi Arabia. So whatever you say about Donald Trump, at least he's able to get on with people like Mohammed bin Salman. So here is his chart, MBS. So we'll call him MBS. It's kind of easier to say. I mean, that's how he's generally called. And don't have a time of birth for MBS. So all we know, he was born on August the 31st, 1985. And he has the moon in Pisces and the sun in Virgo. I mean, he definitely has the moon in Pisces. because if we take the midday chart, the moon will be somewhere between, say 13 Pisces and 25, 26 Pisces. So definitely in Pisces. He was born around the time of a full moon, just after a full moon. So one of those people who've got that Sun in Virgo, Moon in Pisces split. That is the issue with a full moon, isn't it? So he is a Virgo, not a super strong Virgo. He's only got the Sun in this sign, but I think there is certainly going to be a strong sort of Virgo element there. So with the Sun in Virgo, Moon in Pisces, there's a desire for things to be done his way. And the Moon in Pisces, it could be quite an angry Moon in Pisces, getting annoyed, perhaps perhaps lashing out. And Moon in Pisces can, in certain situations, be quite brutal. And so he has a reputation for being quite tough and not always appreciating people who oppose him. For example, the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who wrote unpleasant things about him in Saudi Arabia, and Jamal Khashoggi visited the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in, I think, 2018, and to deal with some paperwork, and he didn't come out alive. And we'll be talking about that in a moment. And Mohammed bin Salman, he has Mars in Leo, like Trump, and like Benjamin Netanyahu has Mars in Leo as well. And so his Mars in Leo is square Saturn. So having a Mars Saturn square is, that is a tough aspect. And you could say that Mars Saturn can be quite brutal, and he is aware that there is always a struggle. I think you could say that Mohammed bin Salman's position is quite dangerous. He's brought these reforms in. He's got to sort out the economy, but he's also aware of all of the rivalry. There are lots of people in Saudi Arabia who are not happy with what he's doing, and in terms of the succession, when does he become king of Saudi Arabia? And people are going to be rival factions. So you could say with Mars square Saturn, he is completely aware of the vulnerability of his position, and so he takes a view that he has to be tough to make sure he stays in power, even stays alive. It's a dangerous world he's living in, and maybe the Mars square Saturn is reflective of that. And it's not just Mars square Saturn. He's got Mercury square Saturn. I would have thought with Mercury square Saturn, he is capable of being quite abrasive if things don't go his way, and he's very fixed. I mean, he's got Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and so he's got 5 out of the 7 of the traditional planets in fixed signs, and so once he's made a decision, he really wants to sort of go with it. And as far as examples of his behavior is concerned, he was sort of connected with the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. So here's the horoscope of Jamal Khashoggi, who was born in 1958, who was a Libra. I mean, I've looked at the synastry between Khashoggi and MBS. I don't think I found anything particularly noteworthy. It's especially as we're dealing with 2 charts where we don't have we don't have a time of birth, so there is a little bit of a problem here, but broadly speaking, you could say that Khashoggi's Pluto was relatively close to MBS's Sun. I mean, that's not a very personal connection, but it's more of something generational. The Pluto in Virgo, in early Virgo generation, is not quite gelling with MBS's Sun, and perhaps he might feel a little bit offended. And of course, MBS is not the kind of person you really want to offend. And also Mars. So Khashoggi has a Mars Saturn square in his chart, and that Mars is square MBS's Sun. Well, was square MBS's Sun, and so Virgo might have struck out. Virgos actually don't particularly like being criticized, particularly if you're in a position of supreme power. I mean, if you think about other Virgos who were in positions of supreme power, well, the obvious Virgo is Ivan the Terrible. Ivan the Terrible was a Virgo. He had his Sun at 11. He had a Sun-Mars conjunction in Virgo. Now, just because he's Ivan the Terrible doesn't mean to say that he isn't a role model. I mean, I think Stalin had a considerable admiration for Ivan the Terrible. He was a successful Tsar. He might have been brutal, but he got things done. And another Virgo who had a lot of power was Lyndon B. Johnson. He was a Virgo. Not everyone agreed with his approach, but he was a very successful president. And in terms of getting his agenda done, and from a political view, Lyndon B. Johnson was the most effective post-war politician, arguably. I mean, he just knew how to pull the levers in Congress, and he knew how to get people to do things his way, and he was able to threaten, and I don't know about blackmail, but he was able to threaten people and cajole people until they just did it his way. So when Virgos do have the levers of power, they can be quite effective. So then there is a chart of Khashoggi's death when he was murdered in the Saudi consulate, in Istanbul. And so if you look at what MBS was doing and feeling when that happened, Jupiter. Look at the time of Khashoggi's death, Jupiter was right on MBS's Saturn. So he has this Mars. So MBS has a Mars Saturn square, and so when Jupiter was hitting that. When Jupiter was hitting that Saturn, it's that's perhaps when that Mars Saturn activated. One's sort of reminded of the was it Henry II and Thomas Becket, and sort of rid me of this turbulent journalist, and his orders were done. We don't know quite what happened to Khashoggi, but anyway, he said things that MBS didn't really like, and he ended up dead. And I think Khashoggi's family were compensated by the Saudi government for what happened. And so, that gives us perhaps a little bit of an insight into MBS. And MBS became Crown Prince. In other words, when he effectively became the guy in charge, I don't know what date, but on June the 21st, 2017. So he became Crown Prince at the time of the summer solstice, just around. I don't know what time, but it's here's a chart for when it happened, and the Sun had just gone into Cancer. Mars was in Cancer. Remember, this doesn't have a time, and so it's not a chart in itself that is, to my mind, especially dramatic. Though we should perhaps be thinking about the solstice itself. So, what about the solstice set? What about the solstice chart? The moment the Sun went into Cancer on June the 21st, 2017 at 7:24 a.m. Riyadh time. So this chart is perhaps more informative. At the time of the solstice set for Riyadh, Uranus was on the midheaven. So Uranus on the midheaven can sort of indicate governmental change, and the government is going to just start doing something. Uranus in Aries, right on the midheaven, or within 3 degrees of a midheaven. And what is interesting about this chart is the position of Saturn and the midheaven. So Saturn was at 24 degrees 5 Sagittarius, and the midheaven was at 24 degrees 5 Aries. I'm not quite sure whereabouts in Riyadh this was set for, but if assuming this is the center of Riyadh, Saturn was exactly square the midheaven at a time when Uranus was fairly conjunct the midheaven for this solstice, and so Saturn and in fact it's more than that. Look at this grand trine in fire signs. So grand trine Saturn, trine the node, trine Uranus. So this grand trine was picked up by the solstice chart set for Riyadh. So it was an important time, and Saturn trine the midheaven. You have to get government in order. You have to perhaps get excessive expenditure in order. Perhaps you have to get the princes in order, because there are loads of princes, aren't there, in Saudi Arabia, and they all get money, and they're all sort of part of the old system. And MBS is a reformer, and so this is him becoming crown prince. And then there is the chart of Saudi Arabia. So there are several charts for Saudi Arabia, but I'm going for a 1932 chart. And even with the 1932 chart, there is a question about what time do you take it. So September the 23rd, 1932 is the date that is celebrated in Saudi Arabia when the country was unified. And so one possible chart for Saudi Arabia would simply be this: you take noon on September the 23rd, and so notice how the Sun has just gone into Libra, and so we get a kind of solstice feel to it, solstice and equinox. It's interesting how MBS became crown prince at the time of the summer solstice, and how modern Saudi Arabia in 1932 at the time of the autumnal equinox, and so that Sun in Libra is immediately going to catch our attention, because Saturn and Neptune are in the process of making conjunctions to the Sun. Oppositions to the Sun. So there's going to be a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in very early Aries, so opposition Saudi Arabia's Sun. That might indicate issues. The Sun could represent the leadership of Saudi Arabia, or just the whole dynamism of the country. Could it be that oil prices are going to have an impact? Remember, The Economist says that oil prices have to be over $90 for the economy really to really to prosper. I think that's what they need in terms of public spending. I haven't got the article here, but apparently $90 is an important point, and now with oil prices at $61 or something like that, that is not so good. Though this chart is one approach, and Astro.com suggests an alternative chart, but one should actually set it for the sunset before. So this is sunset for September the 22nd, 1932, where the sun is at 29 degrees 22 Virgo. So if you take this chart, Neptune has just gone over Saudi Arabia's sun, and Saturn is on the verge of crossing it as well. So one wonders what kind of pressure Saudi Arabia is under at the moment. But this is just one chart, and there's a good chance that MBS will get over it. If you're MBS and you've got Mars Saturn square, you have to maintain control, and you're not going to allow Saturn Neptune conjunctions crossing your country's sun to cause too many problems. Although I think that as far as astrology is concerned, astrology is illegal in Saudi Arabia. So if I went to Saudi Arabia and practiced astrology, I assume I'd be thrown into prison and they would throw away the key. Now, talking about keys, a key moment in Saudi Arabia's history was the discovery of oil. And here is the chart for the discovery of this oil well called Dammam 7. And it was on March the 4th, 1938. So, 5 or 6 years after Saudi Arabia came into being and came into unified being. Here was a moment that oil was discovered. And what's kind of interesting about this chart is Neptune. Neptune was exactly opposition Venus. So you had Venus in Pisces. You had Mercury's sun and Venus in Pisces. And so for oil, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You associate Pisces, water, liquids, oil, and then Neptune being opposition Venus. I mean, it's an opposition. It's not in itself a fortunate aspect, but this is when the gush happened. And so Venus opposition Neptune, it all just happened. And so this was an important moment in Saudi Arabia's history, and certainly in terms of the history of its of oil. And notice the planets in Aries. Saturn's at 4 degrees Aries, 5 degrees Aries. Mars is at 24 Aries. Moon is at well, we don't know where the moon is. The moon would it would presumably have discovered oil during the daytime, so moon is probably a few degrees off that position, but probably the moon was between 6 and 12 degrees Aries. So that does mean that Saturn and Neptune are soon going to cross the Aries planets for that discovery. And this is a chart of Saudi oil. So next year, Saudi Arabia, as an oil-producing country, has its Saturn return. So the Saturn return of the Dammam 7 well, plus Neptune is going to cross Saturn. So it could be, when we look at oil in Saudi Arabia, that next year there could be a real challenge to Saudi Arabia as an oil-producing country, or at least as a country that can keep itself together through its oil industry. I mean, I don't know what the price of oil is going to be like. I'm assuming that through OPEC and other means, Saudi Arabia is going to do what it can to keep the price of oil up. But there could be big challenges with for next year for Saudi Arabia. And of course, if there are problems with the oil industry and problems of getting money from the oil industry, then that has implications for the whole economy. And of course, that's going to have big implications for for MBS. And finally, I just want to quickly compare MBS's chart with that of Donald Trump. So they apparently get on well with each other, and so here's Donald Trump's chart, and so we'll put MBS on the inner wheel. We'll put Donald Trump on the outer wheel. So you can see that both MBS and Donald Trump have their Mars at Leo, Mars in Leo, well, late Leo. So Donald Trump has his Mars at 26, 27 Leo. MBS has got his Mars at around 24 Leo. So there is potential there for conflict, but so far it doesn't seem to have been a problem. And in fact, Donald Trump's Mars is square MBS's Saturn. So, so far so good. Maybe Donald Trump at some level is aware of that Mars-Saturn square in MBS's chart. Obviously, it's very unlikely he is astrologically aware of it, but maybe on some intuitive level he understands that he has to tread carefully with MBS, and perhaps he also understands that MBS is an important person who he doesn't want to offend. I mean, you compare Donald Trump's treatment of MBS with that of Biden. I mean, I don't think MBS could stand Biden, and so Biden was pretty bad for relations between the United States and Saudi Arabia. And I don't think I've got anything more to say about the subject of Saudi Arabia. Sorry, I'm all over the place. I haven't really given it sort of much thought, but maybe this is just a start for me thinking about Saudi Arabia and the astrology of Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia, like it or not, is an important country. So thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.